Many of you have likely heard the story of Daniel and the lion's den before. These dramatic hours in which God seals up the mouths of the beasts in order to save his servant from their jaws is kind of a top 10 in the Sunday school playbook. But I believe even beyond what we think we know about Daniel, God has some powerful wisdom to reveal this morning. So I'm going to ask us to apply a disciplined approach as we seek to hear the word which the Lord has for us today. Rather than just turning to the VeggieTales rendition, many of you watch Daniel on VeggieTales, many of your theology, I know, shaped by the little vegetables that they are. Or rather than reading the Cliff Notes, we're going to dig in and do some real manuscript study this morning. Many of our small groups have been learning to use this approach as a way for us to slow down and give God space to reveal something rich and deep and new from the scriptures. So, the first step in manuscript study is to place the chapter 6 for Daniel and those lions, in the larger context of the biblical narrative. To do this, we're going to rewind all the way to the beginning of Daniel. And if any of you want to actually get in the manuscript, there are Bibles in your pews. You can read along. I'm going to Daniel 1:1. We read there the context for Daniel and the lion's den. In the 3rd year of the reign of Joachim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Joachim, king of Judah. Remember, Judah is connected to God and God's people, the Hebrew people. The Lord delivered Joachim, king of Judah, into the hand of the Babylonians, along with the articles of the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put the treasures of God's house in the house of Babylon's gods. So the story of Daniel begins as Jerusalem is captured and besieged, and the temple of a holy God is looted by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar. Then we learn a very pivotal detail. The king ordered Aphaz, that's one of his leaders, his governors, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility. Young man without physical defect, showing aptitude for learning, well-informed, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. The governor was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years and then enter the king's service. So the transplants, the young people of Israel, are not to be beaten into submission by their captors. They're to be groomed into compliance. They're to be wined and dined into submission. The king is hoping to acculturate them through the fine living of Babylon so that they can become puppets who will control their own people. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. There is nothing more violating as a captured people to be stripped of your name. Imagine if someone took over our land and said, Isla, your name is not Isla anymore. It's Mary now. You don't get to be known as the person you know yourself to be as a way to rob you of your identity and force upon you a new identity. We're even going to take your name. And so Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar, Hananiah Shadrach, Mishael Meshach, and Uriah Abednego, forced to take the names of their captors. But Daniel. Whenever we do manuscript study, we're always looking for that hook, that sticking point where we realize, oh, there's a conflict here. A revelation is about to be made. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine. In fact, Daniel insists he will eat only vegetables. So, young people, if you want to defy the authority figures in your life, say, no, I will not eat steak or pasta. I am only eating broccoli, so help me God. And that'll really show them. After 10 days on his vegetarian diet, Daniel and his cohort of faithful ones looked healthier and better nourished than all the young men who ate the royal food. Here we begin to notice the truth that God is revealing. These young men are faithful to the Lord. They will not be corrupted by the king's temptation. They won't be swept away by all the pretty or alluring things in the culture around them. Because they are loyal to the Lord's way, God fortifies them. God strengthens their body, but even more gives them knowledge and understanding. God gives knowledge and understanding to his faithful ones, and Daniel is given this particular ability to understand visions and dreams because he ate vegetables. I love vegetables, but on a broader scale because he hung in there. He stuck with what he believed his God was calling him to do. Daniel was very careful to remind the people around him that his giftedness, his wisdom, and his ability to interpret visions and dreams did not come from him, but from the God he served. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever, Daniel prayed. Wisdom and power are his. God changes the times and the seasons. He deposes kings and raises them up. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerner. God reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells in God. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Because of Daniel's faithfulness and his absolute reliance on God, God provides him this great clarity, through which he becomes the interpreter of royal dreams. He foresaw the rise and fall of many kingdoms, and his visions gained him the trust of King Nebuchadnezzar. His faithfulness inspired King Nebuchadnezzar, the one who had stolen him from his homeland, to begin to worship the God of Daniel. The king would say, surely your God, Daniel, is the God of gods and the Lord of lords, the revealer of great mysteries. Daniel's faithfulness converts Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuchadnezzar will not hold his power for long. A subplot in the book of Daniel that only emerges when we look at the long game, when we place those lions in context, is that while God reigns eternal and Daniel remains faithful, the kings and rulers of our time rise and fall quite quickly. As Daniel envisioned, King Nebuchadnezzar was driven from his kingdom into disgrace in the wilderness. His son Balthazar rise to power. Balthazar calls Daniel in, sharing, Daniel, you are one of those exiles that my father brought from Judah. But I have heard that God has given you insight and intelligence and wisdom. So King Belshazzar asked Daniel to interpret the writing on the wall. He offers Daniel great wealth and great power, which Daniel denies. But Daniel can interpret the writing on the wall, which causes Belshazzar, a second generation of kings, to convert to worshiping and acknowledging Daniel's God. But don't worry, Belshazzar won't last long either. The writing of the wall predicted his demise, which came about quickly, which brings about the rise of a third king, Darius. Darius, the ruler of the day when Daniel meets the lions. Darius appointed governors. He recognized the greatness of Daniel, And so he planned to put Daniel over the whole kingdom. Now, this is really something. 3 administrations, 3 kingdoms. And who stands out? Generation after generation. Daniel, a transplant, an alien, an outsider, so stands out for his integrity and the wisdom that comes from his God that perpetually he's placed over all the natural-born citizens. Daniel's character is consistent, which sets the climate for the climax of the story. At seeing Daniel's rise again to power, the administrators and the satraps are middle management, they tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Hear this. In Daniel's conduct of government affairs, Lord have mercy, they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. We can look all around and rarely find one such as Daniel anywhere, let alone government affairs. They could find no corruption in him, which infuriated the other leaders, those who wanted to take his power. And so the royal administrators, all those paranoid and jealous folks that Miss Sherry described, they all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being for 30 days should be thrown into the lion's den. They could not diminish Daniel by one of his own failures, so they set this trap. Will he worship a god other than God? Now, Daniel learned that the decree had been published. He went home to his upstairs room with the windows open and prayed towards Jerusalem. Now, often when we read our Bible, we kind of skim over details like this. But when we do manuscript study, we look for the wrinkle. We look for that thing that makes us curious. And so we would ask, why did Daniel face Jerusalem? Why did we use paper and ink? Why did we take space in the scriptures to tell us that? The digging in gives opportunity to reveal a deeper meaning that we may have missed before. You see, if we follow the clue, we learn that praying towards Jerusalem is a practice deeply rooted in the history of the Israelites. It is a practice that is common throughout the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. You see, when King Solomon, the one who built the temple for God, first dedicated the temple of Jerusalem, he foreshadowed that there would be days that God's people would be driven away from Jerusalem, the holy city. He foresaw, Solomon, in the wisdom given by God, that there would be a time that God's people would be exiles, and they wouldn't be able to come to their temple to pray. And so Solomon laid out, on the day he first dedicated the temple, he laid out a path for how God's people, when exiled, would get home to God through prayer. This is so cool. What's really cool is I had forgotten this until I accidentally stumbled upon this passage from Chronicles when writing a different devotion. Because that's how, when we give God a little time, God takes us deeper. In Chronicles 6, we hear the prayer of Solomon. When they sin against you, God, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them, and you give them over to the enemy who takes them captive to a land far away, and if they have a change of heart in that land where they're held captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captivity, and say, we have sinned, we have done wrong, and acted wickedly. If they turn back to you, If they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their captivity where they were taken, and pray towards the land you gave their ancestors, where does Solomon say they should pray towards? Facing Jerusalem. Isn't this so cool? You didn't know this before. Maybe you did. It was just me. They pray towards the land you gave their ancestors, towards the city you have chosen, towards the temple I have built for your name. When they pray, facing Jerusalem from the exile, then from heaven, your dwelling place, God, hear their prayers and their pleas, uphold their cause, forgive your people who sinned against you. Daniel kneeled down facing Jerusalem in order to ground himself in the promises of his ancestors. He prayed that through his faithfulness, God would answer Solomon's prayer from generations past and bring God's people home. Daniel prayed 3 times a day. Notice Daniel is not just praying because he found himself in a predicament. This isn't a new behavior for Daniel. Daniel is continuing a long-held rhythm of praying 3 times a day, every day, just as he had done before. And those setting the trap, they see Daniel praying and asking God for help. And so they go to King Darius and convince him to sentence Daniel to death. So the king gives the order. And they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king saying to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Notice here the king adds to his sentence a prayer for Daniel's deliverance. I think that's pretty wild. The sentencing judge adds a prayer that the one being sentenced will be delivered and given new life. Now, I underlined the "may your God whom you serve continually," put a pin in it, because in manuscript study we look for repetition, and it's going to come back around. Now, the king brought a stone and placed it over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. The connecting thread through this scripture is who cannot be changed. It's not our circumstance that cannot be changed. It's the God who is with us in every circumstance. As we dig in, we catch that the seal is placed over the den to seal Daniel's fate. Except for the God who cannot be kept out by rock nor seal, the God who meets Daniel in the den and shuts up the mouth of those lions. And so the night passes, and in the morning, the king gets up and hurries to the lion's den. He calls out to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God," remember what we underlined, "who you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" What is Darius learning from Daniel about God? That God is steady, that God is worthy of continual, perpetual, faithful, ongoing service. Has that God, Daniel, who you serve continually, been able to rescue you from those lions? Well, you betcha, Darius. Absolutely. Daniel answers in the light of day, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut up the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." Who is the judge? Who can sentence or save? The God who changes things. The God who is in the midst of every circumstance and can change our circumstances. The God who can hear and save and deliver God's people. And so, because we have invested in this deeper reading of the scriptures, placing them in context, focusing on each word and the correlations, we can claim a broader revelation from the text. The God whom Daniel serves continually rescued him. Not the God who Daniel threw a Hail Mary prayer out of the blue, but the God who Daniel had been praying to 3 times a day, cultivating that relationship, gaining that wisdom, acquiring the vision. The God who Daniel served continually rescued him from the mouths of the lions. This God saved Daniel and also a third king. King Darius then wrote to all the nations and people of every language on earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel." Daniel converted 3 kings by eating vegetables and praying faithfully 3 times a day. Whatever was coming his way, he was praying and serving that God continually. And so King Darius went on to praise, "For God is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed." Whose kingdom? Not Darius's. He's going down like the others before him. God's kingdom will not be destroyed. As Darius praised, his dominion will never end. God rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So what can we claim from this longer story of Daniel? I think we are wise to learn that we should not just pray when confronted by the lion's den. Not just pray in our most vulnerable or fearful hour, but we are wise to start praying today, 3 times a day or more, placing ourselves on the foundation of all God's promises and the faithfulness that God has revealed generation after generation. For it is perpetual prayer, perpetual faithful service that becomes the conduit, the connection that each of us can have to God, through which we gain perpetual, ongoing, consistent, notable integrity. Ultimately, what converted those kings was the integrity of Daniel, his faithfulness to keep on praying and serving. Through the rise and fall of many kingdoms, it is Daniel's integrity that is his witness. And I pray as we lean into the power of prayer and God offers his wisdom and his vision, that it will be the godly integrity fashioned in us that becomes the witness to convert many. Thanks be to God.